The social contract is the basic principle that individuals and governments have certain rights and responsibilities to one another. In a nutshell, people pay taxes, and the government gives us schools, roads, hospitals, and the fire department. That sounds like a fair deal, but when was the last time we updated the contract? When was the last time we asked fundamental questions about how our society is run and what changes we should make? Who goes to jail and why? What do we learn in school and why? What does the military do and why? We, or at least I, have a tendency to think about the topic or the scandal of the day and not the underlying issues that create them in the first place. Hopefully, through this conversation, we can attempt to answer some of those fundamental questions and redraw the social contract.
And I guess this is we can sort of like go off to the next question part here, right? And I guess it begs to ask the question, well, then how do we measure and what do we consider success in the world? As we started off by asking about the cost, right? The environmental cost and social cost of the success that society that we're considering a society. And as we're going into a very technologically advanced society, right, demanding for electric cars, etc., and the titans of those industries are lauded because in our economic system, again, they're creating jobs, right? We talk with Amazon, we talk Tesla, like name it, right?
Right.
These
Walmart,
people are lauded, right? They are like the best of the best. Well, so the only way we measure sort of their success is again through their profit margins. How much profit are they getting? How many jobs have they provided or not? All right. And so why is it that we measure it that way? And are there any other ways that we could measure those things?
I think so. Like I would say maybe 10 years ago, that was the first time I even thought to question. Yeah, I would say when I was in like undergrad, that was the first time I even questioned the concept of a 40-hour work week. You know what I mean? I think before then, I thought since the time of Adam and Eve, we just work 40 hours a week. We have Saturday and Sunday off, and then we go back. You know what I mean? Like, right. I literally didn't question it until I was like, oh yeah, what happens if we work 4 days a week? And it's like, oh yeah, if you commit 40 hours to one thing, how are you going to be able to do anything else? And then it's like, and then it begs even other deeper questions. Like, if someone is a stay-at-home mom, isn't that a job? Why aren't they being paid? You know, if someone is taking care of if someone has taken themselves out of the labor market to provide for an elderly parent or for a sibling or for a child, isn't that work? You know what I mean? That's not 48 hours. That's not 40 hours. That's 24 hours a day. And so it really, like, the way we measure things, like literally our calculator, our social calculator, I think is, I don't want to say broken, but it's essentially an abacus. You know what I mean? It's ancient. It doesn't measure the modern realities of the world we live in. So, when you talk about like the new billion, because I'm sure you saw on Forbes or Business Insider or whatever, but the new billionaires list, and the world has added, over 1,000 new billionaires this year, and so many people are struggling, and it just, I don't know, like, please feel free to jump in, but when it comes to like how we measure success, I think probably the best way to, like, and again, maybe this is too simple, but like, I would say the diversity of things that you do is a great way of measuring success. Think about it. Do you want to do, like, if you had your dream job, I wouldn't want to do my dream job 80 hours a week. You know what I mean? I would want to work on something that I'm really passionate about. I want to get a good night's sleep. I want to hang out with my friends. I want to cook and eat really good food. I want to be physically active. And if I'm a curious person, which I am, I'm going to have lifelong curiosities, whether that's learning a new language or learning how to fix it, whatever. So I would say if we're going to look at new ways to measure success, I would say the new way of measuring success should be balance. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like if
Right.
you're able to, yeah. So I would love to hear your answer. But if we're taking suggestions for new ways, I would say how well is your life balanced? That's how we should define and measure success. What do you think?
Absolutely, I agree, and I think this again is the conundrum that we have, right? Because we measure success through the gross domestic product, right? GDP, which is
Yes.
really just a quantifying of the market value of services and products produced within the borders of a country. And this is how we always measure success. Again, you go anywhere and any of the business channels or whatever channels, you always hear GDP grew by 5%, GDP grew by 6%, right? And that's the only measure that we talk about. But there's so many countries around the world that have tried to balance these things, because we know just because a country has a high GDP does not mean that people in that country are happy, right?
Yes.
The United
Absolutely.
States in 2019 had, I think, 1.7 trillion something dollars, or 19 trillion dollars, I think, just for that year, fiscal year,
Of course.
that they
Yeah.
had. So it had a lot of money in 2019. But yet their happiness index was the lowest. They went to
Of
17 in
course.
the world,
Of
right? They're
course.
dropping really quickly.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to find a balance of counting between both, right? And there have been countries that have tried to do just counting happiness. So a country called Bhutan,
Bhutan.
with their king in the 1970s, created the gross national happiness index. Basically,
Mhm.
he, instead of counting GDP, they wanted to to count national happiness, and they
Happiness.
did it,
Yeah.
through a survey, like a 3-hour survey, where basically I think it was every 4 years, they would send people across the country, pay them to go and administer this 3-hour survey with people, and they would pay them for answering the questions. And
Mhm.
they would ask questions, of course, like, um, how many times do you meditate? How many
Mhm.
times do you quarrel with your family? How many times do you
Right.
spend with your family, etc.? And then they would try and quantify all of this information, and to them that would give them the idea that, okay, this country is happy, and that, of course, they were labeled the happiest country in the world, at least the happiest country in the world, but not on the happiness index. They were actually pretty low. And so, the conundrum in the country was that because the world is changing, the world is so globalized. Perhaps in the 1800s, Bhutan could have been
Mhm.
great at just counting the gross national happiness index, and that's fine for them. But because of how
Mhm.
globalized the world is, the youth in that country themselves, there's a lot of anxiety. The country is changing. Younger people want to have access to cars and etc. and other things in the modernized world that perhaps their parents never really had access to. And so the
Mhm.
way they see success is very different to the way their parents saw what gives them happiness, etc. And so countries like Scandinavia, I think, have done a better job at doing this, right? They've been able to, of course, you have to measure success in terms of the economic system, because as much as people say, money doesn't bring you happiness, I think money
Mhm.
gives you happiness. Money gives you happiness. Maybe it's not everything, but it gives you a way to gain things that gives you happiness, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it gives
That's.
you yeah, it gives you access to do the things you were saying, right? If you want to travel, you can travel because you have the money to do so, right? If you want to go and just do a different skill, if you have money
Yes.
and you have the security of being able to do something different, you can do it, right? And this is where the Scandinavian countries have done best, is that they've been able to provide that social safety net for people to be able to access things that they want to do, and they don't feel the pressure to constantly be like, I have to stay in this job that I hate just because
Yes.
there's nowhere else that I can do. And
Yeah.
if I want to have a family, I can have a family because it's going to be really expensive to have a family, right? So
Mhm.
because we're not provided, there's no maternity leave in certain countries, right? And if
Right.
you lose a family member, for example, that doesn't even exist. And of course, I know in Mauritius and India, they have like grievance leave. So if you
Mhm.
lost a if a woman lost a baby, they can leave. In Mauritius, I think it's up to a year. I know New Zealand just passed it recently, and they were lauded in sort of Western media. But there are a lot
Mhm.
of countries in the global South that have been doing this for a long period of time, and So basically you can go on leave to grieve for the loss. So imagine just like the idea of empathy is embedded into the political and economic systems of those
Yes.
countries.
Yeah.
And yet in our own countries, here we are in Ontario, we're fighting our own government for things like sick leave.
Yeah.
Like,
It's
imagine,
really, yeah.
right?
Yeah, again, yeah, it's, no one is asking to, I don't know if you saw this, but it's like the minimum wage would be something like $40 an hour if it were on pace with what Wall Street CEOs make in bonus. And it's like, we're not even asking for that. We're not even asking for $20 an hour. You know what I mean? Like, we're just asking for $15. And it's just like, no. Like, it's like, no, you're not getting. And it's like, the more reasonable our request is, the more like the opposition is like, that's fucking crazy. That's socialism. That's insane. You know what I mean? Like, it's like there's people on, it's like 6 weeks after giving birth, you should return to work. You know what I mean? Like, just think about that for a second. Like, if I tore my ACL, I would need more than 6 weeks to return back to work. Childbirth?
Yeah.
And you want me to be back in 6 weeks? Are you, bro? Get the fuck out of here. And it's like, yeah. And then the companies that give you 6 weeks, it's like, oh, thank you. You're so generous for giving me 6 weeks off to take care of. And my baby's 6 weeks old. What? He can take care of himself. He's gonna go get a job.
6 weeks old. Yeah, he can go and he can start crawling.
Yeah, you know how the kitchen works, right? You know how to make a sandwich. It's like, what the hell are we doing?
And then we ask, and then people will go. Of course, a lot of people would bring up like overpopulation, that we should, but like we wouldn't be having conversations about overpopulation if people had access to education, if people had access to actually exactly what we were talking about, a robust social safety net, including everything from sick leave to maternity leave, etc. Free college education, which many countries have, universal health care. These are not, again, when we talk about them, it sounds so insane, but countries do this.
Right. It's normal.
It's like, it's so normal. Like, and